Hey guys, doing another topic video this week. Today we are discussing who you think is the most overrated movie director and why. But before we talk about that, I'm going to plug my website. It is deepfocuslens.com. I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that's something that interests you, you can always go to that link. Or if you want a commission and you have any questions or anything like that, my email is below for that and I'm happy to chat with you. But yes, this is a very hot topic here, overrated directors, and I got a lot of responses. Most of them the same response, but it's okay. So we will start with the first one. Christopher Nolan. His films have a grandiose scale and an epicness to them, but they're severely lacking in character depth and emotion. His films are often turgid and overly convoluted for the sake of trying to be the smartest guy in the room. Well, I've talked about Christopher Nolan, I feel like, to death. I don't know what else I could possibly say about him to, help people understand my opinion. If you want an in-depth talk about any of that, I say watch my review for Tenet, Dunkirk. I think I did Dark Knight. I've done a lot of Christopher Nolan over the years, but I think those are some good ones where I really go into it. Look, everyone knows I've never really been a Christopher Nolan fan. I saw him on this list more than anybody. Though I have to say, I don't necessarily agree with the same reasons why you're disagreeing here. You say, his films are severely lacking in character depth and emotion, and yes, they are, but I don't think that, I don't think character depth is what he's going for. I think he's more into abstract concepts and he's more into kind of the experimental aspects of blockbuster filmmaking. He's more interested in popping the hood, looking at the mechanics of the way that filmmaking works and kind of the idea behind the illusion, how they mess with time. And he's kind of subverting the structure and everything in order for you to see things in a different way. I totally get what he's doing. And I think that, like with something like Tenet, it was him at his most shameless. It was him at his most, I don't care, I'm going to make the dialogue clunky. I'm going to kind of be cheeky about it. There was a humor to it. And certainly a lot of references to nostalgic film, to old cinema of the past. So, in a sense, even though I really struggle with Tenet, I had to kind of enjoy that aspect of it. I was compelled by the humor a little bit. So you do get a sense that Nolan is quite aware of what he's doing to a degree, but I do have to agree with you. I think that his filmmaking just suffers. It's never worked for me because a lot of times the building blocks that he's using to, create this big construct, to create this big, whatever it is, like this experiment, often get bogged down by a lot of the exposition to the soundscape. There's just a lot of clunkiness to the devices that he's employing here. And it's always just been an issue for me. And I've always been more a fan of people who can use that kind of mechanical, very calculated filmmaking in a way where somehow the emotion comes from the way you're exploring everything. If that makes any sense. There's more of an invisible technique there, whereas I think that Nolan doesn't quite have the awareness to be able to do that. But I will say, I do respect him to a certain level. I mean, as people know, I thought Dunkirk was brilliant. I thought that was by far the best film that he's ever done. I just think it weaved in the elements the most seamlessly in a way that truly felt like, that heightened level of filmmaking I think he's always wanted to reach. But yeah, overall, I've never understood why people really love him so much or why he really caught on to the degree that he has. Oh, Gaspar Noé. I can't stand his films. Always feels like they overstay their welcome and ultimately they don't really bring anything new to the table, in my opinion. Just flashy imagery of a concept not well thought out. This is another director I feel like I have talked about to death. I don't know how much more I could say about Gaspar Noé. I've, reviewed quite a handful of his films. There are two types of people in the world. There are people that love Gaspar Noé and there are people that hate Gaspar Noé. I've never found anybody that is just kind of meh on him. I think, most people have strong opinions on him. And the people who disagree, the people who do not like him, often have the complaints that you have. And so, I understand them. I think they're justifiable. But I think there's a type of person that really gets into Gaspar Noé. It's a type of person that looks at the ambition of film maybe in a different way and allows for a little bit more messiness to come through. Like for me, I don't really mind as much, the messiness of a movie as long as I think, there's a real breakthrough happening creatively. And I think you have a lot of breakthroughs with Gaspar Noé. I felt very similarly to you when I first saw Noé when I was like 16 or something. I hated it. I really, really didn't like his work, but I did get older and, a lot of his films really do kind of apply to the drug culture. Those heightened levels of psychedelia or just like extreme, levels of danger and toxicity when it comes to the things you put in your body. I think that's more what Noé is exploring, for better or worse. So a lot of the issues that you might have seem more bound by, kind of more the literal world, whereas he's very much not literal at all. So, when you say his films overstay their welcome, absolutely. Again, a valid criticism. Can't disagree with you there. But I think that if you're looking at it in a different way, I think all of a sudden you could, the idea of this really kind of soporific, drawn out quality to his movies where things just go and go and go to the point where you feel like you're right on the edge of, falling asleep of boredom. There's a real power to that. He's taking your brain, to a certain level that it's not used to, pushing you to the very blurred areas of the spectrum of emotions. Again, a lot like a psychedelic experience. And, Noé's favorite film, or one of his favorite films, is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is also very similar, as in, it's lulling you into this weird hypnotic place where your brain can go a little bit crazy. And Noé will push you into the levels of boredom to where it feels like you can't take it. He will plunge you into violence in a way that you feel like you can't take it. But through that, something happens. Something is breaking through to the other side. And, like I said, he is somebody who is really all over the place. He's very unrefined. He is a risk taker. I always joke his movies, it's like he's just ejaculating all over everything. He's like a drug addicted college student that you just want to pat on the head and, say, go to the corner for a while. Plenty of times. I have my frustrations with him. You said here that a lot of his concepts are not well thought out. Absolutely not. Most of his films feel very much childlike, but there is a glee and an abandon to that I personally find appealing. So for me, Gaspar Noé is somebody that I really, really love, and I think all of his films are very interesting, but I've learned to give in to it a little bit more in a way that's maybe different from you, but totally respect your opinion. Stanley Kubrick. I don't think his movies say as much about life as people generally say they do. His style became increasingly more played out and less thought-provoking as his career went on, especially after 2001. A talented but thoughtless filmmaker, in my opinion. That is tough. I am not going to say thoughtless, but I don't think that he's overrated. I do not think that Stanley Kubrick is overrated at all. But I do actually agree with a lot of what you're saying here. Regardless, I think that 2001 was his peak. It was his magnum opus. It was, him being able to push into more experimental territory. And yet everything felt very cerebral and very full. And I think once he started applying that to, naturalistic stories, whether it's like, a family stuck in a hotel in The Shining, or, Barry Lyndon, whatever, a lot of the time they felt a lot more skeletal than they did pre-2001: A Space Odyssey. That being said, I still find a lot of those films really interesting. A Clockwork Orange, very interesting, though it doesn't resonate with me in the way that like Dr. Strangelove resonates with me. I am a huge fan of Barry Lyndon, however. That's one of my favorite Stanley Kubrick films, though it is very kind of detached and like, there's a skeletal quality to it. There's something very rich and there's something very timeless about that feeling of being very lost in a society, especially a society like this one that is so pronounced and so kind of, removed from what is primal. And there's a real heartbreaking isolation to that and a poetry to it that I find absolutely stunning. But I do think, for the most part, even though I love The Shining as an example, there is something about it that does feel a bit removed and like it's not quite pushing to the levels of his earlier films. I think the perfect example would be Eyes Wide Shut, which is a film I find very interesting, very compelling, but I'm not really a fan of it. I think that's one of his lesser works, and it involves a lot of, stories of sex and shame that's surrounded by the idea of sex, especially in a modern society, a repressed society. But we see a lot of those themes in Lolita much earlier in his career, and I think that film is so much more interesting. It's so much more layered, and it's funny, and it's all of these different things that I felt was really lacking from a film like Eyes Wide Shut, even though I think it thought it was going more for that immersive, really fluid, psychedelic, kind of like Enter the Void sort of filmmaking. So I can't agree. Like, I love Stanley Kubrick. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, but I do agree with you that a lot of his films did feel a lot less thought-provoking, a little bit thinner once he went past the 2001 period. Martin Scorsese. All of his films are a struggle with morality without ever transcending beyond it. He's not as deep as people give him credit for, but he's certainly good at making himself look the part. Yes, he does have that very kind of Billy Wilder sort of look to him, very distinguishable. I don't know, like I agree with you, actually, I do, to an extent, but I also disagree. I think, yeah, Martin Scorsese, he's one of those people, he's such a student of film, he's such an academic. I think academic is a better word. He studied film and he knows more about it than most people, and he has a respect for it that is infectious, something that I share myself. And I think it's because of that that he's able to create these really brilliant pastiches of nostalgia, but in a way that feels very much his own distinguishable thing, something that has somehow come alive. But I think that's only in specific instances. As an example, Taxi Driver, I think, is one of the great American films ever made. Like, if you want just to study how to write a script, just look at the Taxi Driver script. It's perfection. It's absolute perfection. The direction is perfection. The music, everything about it is perfection. I think it does transcend beyond, like, you know, a typical morality tale, and it goes to some really unique places. So for me, you know, I think it is his most important work. I find a real pain and a beauty in the simplicity of a film like Raging Bull. I love that film. I think there's something really powerful to that subtlety, because he is somebody that is known for more being a bombastic filmmaker. Where I do agree with you, though, it's in his gangster movies. I like them. I do like them, and I respect them. You know, I know Goodfellas is such a huge classic, amazing in terms of technique and everything, just amazing. It doesn't really resonate with me emotionally, and I talked about that. Like, I don't know, I think I reviewed Godfather not so long ago, and I talked about how, you know, like a show like The Sopranos, I feel is like a really powerful show that's really pushing into more personal, more intimate territories, and it's also surrealistic, and it does all of these things that I think really question the idea of existence in a way that, yes, far transcends something that Martin Scorsese does. His mob films, I think, are more kind of bound by the morality cautionary tale without transcending to the levels I think that something like Sopranos did. So yeah, like, you know, movies like that and Casino, The Irishman, I respect them, but, you know, there's something about that montagey quality that makes it hard for me to connect to the characters, and something about the way they perform. I don't really feel it in the way that I feel other types of mob films. So yeah, I'm kind of torn. Like, I don't think he's overrated, yet there are certain parts of his career that I've always felt were a bit overrated, or, you know, I could never really understand why people connected to it so strongly emotionally. D.W. Griffith. Film would have gotten along without him just fine. We might even have a more interesting type of cinema, and certainly one not based in extremely damaging racism. If people hadn't adopted the Griffith model of filmmaking, one can only imagine what cinema would be like today. I don't disagree. I mean, sorry, I disagree with that pretty strongly. I don't think the world, I mean, I think that we owe a lot to D.W. Griffith. He is the father of cinema as he was described. He allowed us to see just what cinema could do. You know, no one had the ambition that he had. He was making these huge, epic movies with such scale. And you know, he allowed us to see what was possible. Really elevate this into something big, a really big art form. He and certain directors of his time pushed the boundaries in ways where, you know, they made major sacrifices, major risks, and I think that was deeply, deeply important just, you know, to the medium. And I know what you mean here, you know, like a lot of his films are tainted, unfortunately, by the racism that reverberated because of a lot of those films, and I think that's very important to remember, but I also think it's very important not to allow that to completely be the blanket statement to cover everything else. I think you've got to look at everything in context. And this was history. Times were quite different. I think if Griffith hadn't done it, somebody else would have. I look at a movie like Birth of a Nation, of course, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. And I think it's an important reminder of where we were at the time and how we can change and be better now. But I also think it's important to point out, besides that, that Birth of a Nation is an extraordinary achievement just in terms of the scope of everything, the battle sequences. It's an extraordinary film if you haven't seen it. And then you look at films like Intolerance and the scope of the sets and just the aesthetic, the costumes and everything. It's unbelievable. So to say that somebody like that, you know, is somebody that could be so easily discarded, I think is unfair to him. But again, I also think it's really important to remember context and remember that, yes, a lot of his films are for better, for worse. There are some really amazing things about them, and I think there are some really dangerous things about them. But I'm glad that we still have them available, because I think history is important. I'm a huge fan of history. I'm a huge fan of film history. It allows me to see things from different perspectives and different time periods where I wasn't even alive or even close to alive, but to each his own. That is the video. Thank you guys so much for answering the question. There were so many on this one, so I thank you very much for that, and we'll do another one pretty soon. Here are my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. It means the world to me. If you are interested in becoming a patron, I have a link for that below, as well as all of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.